back to the beginning to learn from some of our founders. This is our 25th year anniversary, and we are so proud of the work that we've done and have many lessons to learn from how the coalition began. So please welcome Ginny Cruickshank and Kathy Masters in conversation with Valerie Payne, who's from Rebuilding Together NYC and also on the board of NYCETC. Welcome. Is this on? Is this on?
Okay, now we're on. All right, ready to go. So thank you for sticking with us for this final session. Hopefully it will be a fun one. I'm really excited to be here with Kathy and Ginny to have this conversation about kind of the origins of the coalition, especially because it's our 25th year. So we just have a couple of questions that we'll go through. And the first one is, why did you guys start the coalition? What was the impetus behind bringing people together to start this conversation with the workforce practitioners at the time?
Thanks, Valerie. So first of all, let me say, I'm glad that you did hang around. Hopefully knowing a little bit about where we came from might give you some insight on where you're going. The coalition was formed actually to fill a very significant need. At the time, there really wasn't a field of workforce development in New York City. There were people doing the work, but they were mostly attached to other fields. So there were job developers who were working in the refugee program. There were ESL teachers. There were, GED teachers. There were people doing job development in various programs. But if you think it's siloed now, it was incredibly siloed and incredibly lonely in the sense that we didn't have a community. We didn't have a field. And Bonnie Potter, who was the first executive director of the coalition, was then working for Non-Traditional Employment for Women. And she started to gather together some of the executive level folks that were doing this work to try and figure out if we could create a community of interest. And that is how we started. That led us to beginning to analyze some of the programs that were happening, and two other big things were happening right around that time. The Workforce Investment Act had been passed, which turned everything on its head in terms of federal funding for workforce development, or for job training and placement is what it was called then. And welfare to work was happening. And the city of New York was all in on welfare to work, all in on rapid attachment, very negative about training of any sort. And so these were, big major factors that we felt we had very little input into how things were going, and wanted to sort of create an advocacy arm or an advocacy organization that could speak for what was then the nascent field of workforce development.
Yeah, and I also remember performance-based contracting became a thing way back then, and some of those contracts are very large, and there was some concern about the smaller providers and then being squeezed out and not having the opportunity to compete for those funds.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ginny?
So hi, I'm delighted to be here with you all, and thrilled it's 25 years. And Kathy and I and Valerie, we've been talking about what these early years were all about. And I recall the main thing for me was I needed somebody to talk to. I was all alone. And so from a personal standpoint and professional standpoint, even in my own organization, there was nobody for me to commiserate with, to talk to, or how do we do this? We were basically inventing this, as we go. And it turned out that this was also happening in other organizations, as Kathy mentioned, that we were all trying to figure this out by ourselves. And then at the same time, our experience with the then Department of Employment was we were somewhat pitted against each other. We heard of other organizations and they would say, oh, well, so-and-so is doing this in a different way than you are, or you blah, blah, blah. So basically, so that was very uncomfortable for us. And so we really wanted to change the environment. And so we gathered together at the Non-Traditional Employment for Women in Bonnie's office. And then we started, forming the coalition. And as we began our discussions, RFPs were issued by the city, and we realized that we needed to talk to one another about, what are the demands in these RFPs, and to come up with ways of questioning why certain things were being done. And then we also were able to collaborate with one another, subcontract with one another, and go into proposals together because we had learned to trust one another, because we were then together at meetings. So it was an exciting time, challenging time, but we were still sort of forming our way of looking at the world. And as Kathy said, the word workforce development did not exist. And one of the things I'm delighted to learn today, or like in the last couple of days, that the new deputy mayor has the name workforce development as part of her title. So that is a long way we've come in 25 years.
Definitely deserves a round of applause. Our next question is really around, so what were the things that you all implemented early on, the activities? What were the changes that you were trying to make and the impact that you were trying to have once the coalition was formed and operational and off the ground?
So as I said, the beginning was really about trying to share, first of all, gathering information, and then trying to share that information more broadly with the people who were doing the work. So we started to do informational sessions around, and particularly around the changes that were happening that were going to radically affect the way people did their work. So around welfare to work and the WIA changes. And then the philanthropic community became interested, or we were able to get some interest from the philanthropic community, which was then actually beginning the New York Community Trust and a variety of other funders getting together in their workforce funders group, assisted us in developing the coalition. So we started doing a regular newsletter. We started doing more of the educational or presentations around available funding and that sort of thing. We, with the help of philanthropy, created and spun off the Workforce Professionals Training Institute, which was actually a creation of the Employment and Training Coalition. We got rid of the Department of Employment, which at the time was a great victory because it was a very small department that distributed only the federal money. And what we were trying to do then, just as the mayor is trying to do now, and you are still trying to do, is to try and bring these funding streams into more coordination under a single deputy mayor, which only took 25 years to do that. Getting rid of the Department of Employment was the beginning of that. I understand now you folks are advocating to have a similar department, hopefully a more successful one.
Well, where everything can be aggregated in one place. I think that that's the main thing. So I still hear about the silos. When I arrived today, I've been retired from FEGS for the last, I guess, 8 or 10 years. And I still dabble in the work because I'm a consultant for the Jewish Community Council of Greater Coney Island. But I am sort of amazed that there's still, 23 or 27 organizations that still do workforce development. And part of me, wonders about how success is measured. I know that that was one of the things we had raised during the Bloomberg administration, because there wasn't one definition of what is an outcome, what is a placement, how long does a placement have to be for? How do we, measure some of the work that's done And then the person goes on to college. Is that, a good outcome? So I think that some of those issues probably still remain to this day. And so I know that those are some of the things I think, Kathy, you remember you going to the Bloomberg administration, and we were hoping that that system of data and the metrics that they had set up were going to outlive its administration, but did not. So
I noticed that there were some folks here that presented today that were involved in that process, both as consultants and were in government at the time. And, enormous amounts of energy spent on trying to define what is a placement, right? And when the administration ended, it all went by the wayside. That this is a problem. I think that it's a problem with city government generally, and the way in which administrations choose to jettison things or bring things back that maybe weren't as successful. But it's unfortunate to see that with all the progress that has been made, there are still some of the same problems that we were struggling with 20 or 25 years ago.
but the best news that there's, at least 300 of you who can talk to one another, and that you have each other's voices and each other's back, and that you actually have a career, because a career in workforce development did not exist. It was somebody would assign that person, oh, go find them a job, and then they would be scrambling around. So now we do have an official bona fide organization with, as I mentioned, the deputy mayor heading this up. And so, I remain hopeful with that task force that's now been formed, and hopefully gathering everyone together. And I was very struck by some of the comments that were made today about bringing the educational system into this whole process. K through 12 is as involved as all of us are. So I think that's very hopeful. So I keep seeing hopeful signs from where we started, and when we're, sitting in a room, climbing up 3 flights of stairs in National Judicial Employment for Women, if you remember doing that, Kathy. And then we got our own building, our own space, and which was funded by the Fund for the City of New York. They enabled us to have our own office there. And now there's, staff of how many? In 5, yeah. Which is, we started with 1, and a lot of it was done with volunteer work on our behalf and on behalf of the board and the early board members that helped us out along the way.
It was the conference, Annie, was fantastic and very impressive, and impressive numbers of people here that are working in the field, and the degree to which the field has professionalized is really quite impressive, and you all deserve a great amount of credit for having moved it along in the way that you have. I think now the struggle is to make sure that you get paid what you're worth. And of course, the only way that can happen is if the institutions, that the organizations are getting paid what the work costs to do, which is another big struggle.
And I would echo that by saying, I think NYCETC is the place to go for workforce development information and policy and ideas and so forth. Now, that did not happen, many, many years ago. And where the newspapers now will call legislature, the city agencies will call, and they were really on a par with others who are in the field, and also, from the funders to the city agencies and to the foundations, they do look to NYCETC for that kind of background. So I think that that's a, credit to the staff of NYCETC to have done that. So I'm really proud to have been associated with the organization, from the early days, and to see what it's grown into. So that was, some of my comments.
Yeah. So the final question is really, and we've touched on it a little bit, there are some ongoing challenges that were identified way back when, such as what are the metrics? How do we define them? How are we tracking them? And, nonprofits are doing it 5 different ways for each funder. et cetera. And we have made some progress, as we alluded with, the current administration really focusing a lot more on workforce development. And I think with each administration, there's been some progress made. But what, I guess, advice do you have for the group and for the current, for Greg, who's just coming on as the new executive director of the Employment and Training Coalition? What kind of thoughts and suggestions, advice do you have for us as we continue to go forward?
I guess the main thing is to actually try and get things completed during the course of an administration so that they might actually stick into the next, to try and figure out ways to institutionalize things so that they don't get tossed out at each new administration that comes in with new ideas that may or may not be better than what's going on there. I'm not sure, in each situation, what the way to do that is, whether it's about getting things into law, going to the city council and having things in law has certainly helped on the legal services program side. Might be a strategy, I don't know, but it's disheartening. I think when you work on something and you spend a lot of time on it and then, it just absolutely dies, goes nowhere.
So I would, the thought that occurs to me is that we've always been reactive to the funding sources. And I would love to see how the field could be proactive in establishing from the ground up the needs of our constituents, the needs of employers, because we also do represent both parts of the economy, that, the employers who need the workers and how we represent the people on the ground. I also think of the CBOs as being closest to our constituents, and really we are their voice, and it's often a silent voice, because where do they have, we represent that, where else would they go? And so I would love to see how we could get the direction of how this occurs from in a proactive way, rather than reacting to always what the funders are coming down and say, okay, we want you to do this, which is also forced the silos, in my opinion.
Yeah, one of the speakers earlier on raised that issue, and I thought that's absolutely right. There are programs that are doing good work. It should not have to be that you have to turn yourself inside out for a philanthropic funder to create some new program to do some new thing when what you're already doing works quite well. So, I think advocating for that is a really important thing.
I could totally echo that, because when I heard that said today, I remember somebody said, oh, can you come up with something new and innovative? And I'm saying, wait, this works very well. So that was always like a caution to me when somebody said new and innovative. I'd roll my eyes on how can I repackage what I know to works with new words. Oh, this is new and innovative. Oh, really? So I mean, that was famous last words, so I don't know. You're all laughing, so I know that resonates with some of you.
It's still happening. It's still happening.
Right.
All right. Well, that might be a great place to end, unless there are some other thoughts that you have around continuing to focus on the work. I mean, I think the field has certainly really evolved. I know I was just starting out when the coalition was starting, and a bunch of us in the room have been kind of soldiering away and will continue for some time. And, thank you so much.
Congratulations and good luck to you, all of you, really and truly. Really.
Thanks so much.